For millennia, humanity slumbered within a dream it mistook for reality, a carefully constructed cradle called Earth. They believed they were a young species, clever apes who had only just learned to split the atom and gaze at the stars with longing. Their history a short, muddy path from fire pits to skyscrapers. They wrote poems about the vast, silent emptiness of space, never suspecting that the silence was an artificial one, a cosmic wall built to contain them. They were prisoners in a gilded cage, and they didn't even know the bars were there. Their jailers, the Silenti, were a race of beings as ancient as they were patient, entities of pure thought given form in elegant, crystalline bodies that refracted light like living prisms. They were not cruel in the way a predator is cruel. They were cruel in the way a gardener is, pruning back a plant they deemed too dangerous, too invasive for the delicate ecosystem of the galaxy. They had found humanity eons ago, a race of psychic titans whose empire was built on conquest and whose very thoughts could reshape reality. The Harbingers they were called, a name spoken only in the most terrified whispers in the oldest corners of the cosmos. The Silenti, in a war that shattered galaxies and extinguished stars, had not defeated them, but contained them. They had shattered humanity's psychic connection to the universe, bundled their consciousness into fragile biological forms, and placed them on a single, isolated world. They then erected the Great Veil, a symphony of psychic and technological energy that blanketed the planet, suppressing humanity's true nature, wiping their memories clean, and feeding them a false history, a gentle lullaby to keep the sleeping gods dreaming. Now, the Silenti watched over their cosmic prison, posing as distant, silent observers, studying the faint echoes of the power that still slept within the human genome, a terrifying and beautiful potential they could neither understand nor extinguish. In the North American Preserve, a man named Kalen lived his life surrounded by the ghosts of this forgotten past. He was an archivist for the sector's central library, a custodian of the lie. His days were spent in the quiet, dust-mote-filled air of the history vaults, handling brittle paper and flickering digital records that told the grand, fabricated story of humanity's slow climb. Yet, Kalen was a heretic of the quietest sort. He was not a revolutionary, but a man obsessed with the inconsistencies, the frayed edges of the official narrative. He collected fragments of myth that spoke of men who could fly, of ancient cities that touched the clouds, of a time when the stars were not distant points of light, but destinations. His colleagues saw him as an eccentric, a romantic chasing fairy tales. They didn't see the torment behind his obsession, the chronic migraines that plagued him, searing his vision with impossible geometries and the silent screams of dying suns. He would wake in a cold sweat, the phantom feeling of a crown on his head and the weight of 1 billion souls on his conscience, memories of a life he had never lived. He was unknowingly pressing against the bars of the cage, and the veil, ancient and strained, was beginning to groan under the pressure. The first true cracks began to appear not as a flood, but as a series of quiet, inexplicable drips. In the agricultural sector of the Eurasian Preserve, a farmer awoke to find his wheat fields had grown overnight into a perfect sprawling fractal pattern, a design so complex it could not be a hoax. The Silenti's human proxies, the Wardens, descended within hours, quarantining the area and releasing a cover story about fungal mutations. In a crowded marketplace in the South American Preserve, a dropped crate of fruit hovered in the air for 3 impossible seconds, held aloft by the unconscious, terrified will of a child who had merely wished it wouldn't break. The Wardens were there, too, with their memory-wiping aerosols and their calm, authoritative lies. Kalen documented these events, collecting the whispers and deleted news reports in a hidden server, a mosaic of glitches in the great simulation. He saw a pattern, a rising tide of the impossible that mirrored the escalating intensity of his own migraines. He was a man listening to a storm gathering just over a hill, a storm no one else could hear. Far above, in an orbiting station cloaked in invisibility, the Salenti curator known as Lyra felt the tremors as well. Her form, a slender construct of intertwined crystal and light, pulsed with a soft, anxious blue. For 10,000 years, her consciousness had been tasked with overseeing Earth, with monitoring the Veil. She was old, even for her kind, and the endless, silent vigil had instilled in her a strange, forbidden empathy for her charges. Her superiors on the High Council saw the failing Veil as a simple engineering problem, one that required a brutal, efficient solution: the culling, a controlled planet-wide psychic purge designed to kill a third of the human population, the psychic shock of which would reset and reinforce the Veil for another millennium. To Lyra, it was a butcher's solution to a philosopher's problem. She believed the echo, the dormant harbinger essence, was not something to be stamped out, but to be understood. To her, the culling was not just genocide, it was the destruction of the most fascinating data set in the universe. She monitored the rising energy spikes, her focus drawn again and again to a single insignificant archivist in Preserve 7, a man whose neural activity burned like a tiny, nascent star. Kalen's search for answers led him to the remote, windswept mesas of the desert, chasing a recurring motif from his visions, a spire of black rock that appeared in the geological surveys as a magnetic anomaly. Official records stated it was an uninteresting basalt formation, but in his dreams, it was a throne. He secured a research permit under false pretenses, his journey fueled by a desperate, illogical certainty. After days of searching, he found it. Not a spire, but the barely exposed tip of something immense buried beneath the sand. It was a shard of impossible material, cool to the touch and utterly black, drinking the harsh desert light. It felt ancient, like it was dreaming of forgotten physics. He reached out, his fingers brushing against its surface, and the world dissolved. It was not a vision, it was a detonation of memory. He was no longer Kalen the Archivist. He was Kalen Thane, Lord Admiral of the 3rd Harbinger Fleet, standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Star's End. He felt the thrum of the vessel's reality-warping drives through the deck plates. He saw the swirling chaos of the Cygnus Nebula not through a telescope, but with his own eyes, a canvas of creation he was about to unmake. He heard the screams of 1 trillion souls his fleet was extinguishing, and he felt a cold, righteous certainty that it was necessary. The raw data of 1,000 years of war, of love, of loss, of cosmic dominion, flooded his mind in a single, soul-crushing instant. The psychic feedback was a tidal wave that slammed back out from the shard, a beacon of raw, untamed harbinger energy. Kalen collapsed, bleeding from his nose and ears, his mind a shattered mirror reflecting a terrifying, glorious past. The shockwave ripped through the Great Veil. Over the city of Phoenix, the sky flickered. For 94 seconds, the psychic dampening field failed. It was as if a soundproof wall had suddenly vanished, and the entire city was deafened by a scream they didn't know they'd been hearing their whole lives, the silent, background hum of the cosmos. For thousands of people, the echo flared. A woman in traffic felt the metal of her car flow like water around her hands. An old man in a park suddenly understood the language of the birds, a complex grammar of fear and warning. In a hospital, a coma patient sat bolt upright, and began speaking in a long, dead alien tongue, her eyes glowing with a soft, golden light. It was a moment of pure, terrifying transcendence, followed by mass hysteria and chaos as the veil snapped back into place, plunging them all back into the quiet dream. But the memory of the scream remained. Aboard her station, Lyra watched the breach tear across her monitors, a wound of pure energy centered directly on Kaelin. Alarms blared, their crystalline chimes a chorus of catastrophe. The High Council's directive was instantaneous and absolute: quarantine the sector, deploy the culling apparatus, and sterilize the anomaly. But Lyra saw not just a breach, but an opportunity. The archivist had not just touched an artifact, he had communed with it. He had survived a direct, unfiltered download of Harbinger memory, an event previously thought impossible. He was the key. Defying the Council's command, an act of treason punishable by dissolution, she dispatched her personal vessel not to sterilize the area, but to capture. She had to have him, to study him, to understand the force that was about to be reborn into the galaxy. As the first Warden shock troops descended on the desert, their orders to kill the source of the disturbance, Kaelin staggered to his feet. His migraine was gone. In its place was a terrifying clarity. The quiet hum of the world he knew was gone, replaced by the crushing silence of the veil he could now perceive. In his mind, two lives fought for dominance: Kaelin the Archivist and Kaelin Thane, the Conqueror of Stars. He didn't know what he was, but he knew the world was a lie. His history was a prison, and his jailers were coming to kill him. He looked at his hands, no longer just the soft hands of a scholar, but hands that remembered how to break worlds. He had to run. He had to find the others he had heard screaming in that brief, beautiful moment of silence. He had to wake them up before the gardeners came to prune them all. The desert air, once a familiar, dry heat, was now a tapestry of alien sensation. Kaelin could feel the crushing weight of the veil above him, a physical pressure on his soul that made the sunlight seem thin and false. The Lord Admiral in his mind screamed tactical assessments. The approaching Warden craft were subsonic, atmospheric, designed for suppression, not dogfighting. Their energy signatures were clean, efficient, and utterly predictable. The archivist in him screamed in pure terror. He scrambled away from the black shard, his limbs clumsy, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the cage of his ribs. He knew this terrain, had studied its satellite maps for weeks, but the Thane saw it differently, as a battlescape of ridges for cover, arroyos for concealment, and lines of fire. The instincts of the conqueror took over, forcing his terrified body into a low, ground-eating run, his feet finding purchase on the loose scree with an unnatural certainty. He didn't look back. The Thane knew that to look back was to invite death. Behind him, the first plasma bolts from the Warden skiffs struck the black artifact, not with a fiery explosion, but with a dull, sound-swallowing thump. The impossible material of the shard absorbed the energy without a scratch, its silence a mocking rebuke to their power. This only enraged them. Their orders were to sterilize, and the object's resilience marked it as the epicenter. A second volley ignored the shard and stitched a line of superheated glass in the sand, chasing his heels. The archivist whimpered, but the Thane calculated the firing interval, the heat bloom, the trajectory. He threw himself sideways into a narrow, sun-baked wash a fraction of a second before his previous position was turned into a molten crater. He lay there, gasping, the smell of ozone and cooked rock filling his nostrils, the dual consciousness within him a nauseating whirlwind. Two wardens, clad in sleek, gray environmental suits that concealed their humanity, detached from the main group, their jump jets carrying them silently toward his position. They were hunters moving with practiced, dispassionate grace. Kalen was trapped. The archivist's mind flooded with images of failure, of capture, of a quiet death in the sand. But the Thane was a cornered predator, and his rage was a cold, pure thing. Will is the first and final weapon, the memory whispered, a lesson learned in the heart of a singularity. As the wardens landed at the edge of the wash, their rifles raised, Kalen focused. He didn't know what he was doing, only that he had to push. He reached out with his mind, with the raw, untamed echo now screaming inside him, and shoved. The effect was not clean or elegant. The air between him and the wardens warped, shimmering like a heat haze, and then buckled. It was like a silent thunderclap. The two soldiers were thrown backward as if struck by a giant, invisible hand. One hit the canyon wall with a sickening crack of bone and armor, slumping into a heap. The other tumbled through the air, their rifle spinning away, and landed hard when stunned. Kalen felt a violent backlash, a psychic nosebleed. A coppery taste filled his mouth, and a searing pain lanced behind his eyes. He had used a muscle he didn't know he possessed, and he had torn it badly. Staggering to his feet, he snatched the stunned warden's sidearm, a sleek, compact energy weapon, and fled. The archivist was horrified that he knew, without thinking, how to check the power cell and toggle the firing stud. The Thane was disgusted by its pathetic weakness. He ran for hours, guided by the Lord Admiral's relentless drive, pushing the archivist's failing body past its limits. He knew the wardens would be tracking his heat signature, his biometrics, his every footprint. He needed chaos. He needed a crowd. He needed a city. As dusk bled purple and orange across the horizon, he saw the distant, hazy glow of Phoenix. The city was a wound on the psychic landscape, a churning vortex of fear and confusion left by the 94-second breach. It was imperfect shelter, but it was the only shelter he had. Slipping into the sprawling outskirts was easier than it should have been. The security grids were haywire, and emergency services were stretched thin, dealing with the mass hysteria event. The city was a symphony of residual psychic noise. Kalen, now exquisitely sensitive to it, felt the lingering emotional echoes of the awakening terror. Awe, disbelief, rage clinging to the buildings like static. He was a tuning fork vibrating in a room full of ringing bells, and the cacophony was both a shield and a torment. He needed to find a node, a point of clarity in the noise, another voice that wasn't just an echo, but a source. He ditched the warden weapon in a storm drain and pulled his tattered jacket tighter, just another piece of human detritus in the urban sprawl. He let the Thane's senses guide him, filtering through the chaos, searching for a signal, for another mind that was not dreaming. He found her in the tangled, neon-lit streets of the old district. Her name was Elara, and before the breach, she had been a paramedic. Now, she was huddled in a rain-slicked alleyway, her hands pressed to her temples, her eyes wide with a terror Kalen understood perfectly. She wasn't seeing the physical world. She was seeing the truth. To her, the passers-by were not solid figures, but shimmering, chaotic, auric clouds of emotion and thought. The veil was a throbbing, sickly gray membrane stretched over the sky, and the Silenti station, cloaked to normal sight, was a cold, geometric scar of pure wrongness in the heavens. Kalen's approach was like a lighthouse cutting through her sensory fog. He wasn't a chaotic storm of color. His aura was a deep, steady, and terrifyingly powerful gold, a contained star of pure, focused consciousness. He was the calmest, most frightening thing she had ever seen. "You see it too, don't you?" Kalen's voice was rough, his throat raw from dust and dehydration. Alara flinched, scrambling back against the wet brick. "You see the lie." He stopped a safe distance away, holding his hands up in a gesture the archivist hoped was placating. The Thane, however, assessed her as a potential asset, a raw psychic sensitive, an early warning system. "I'm not going to hurt you," Kalen continued, his voice softening. "I felt the breach, I think. I think I caused it, and I think they're hunting us." Alara stared at him, her mind reeling. The word they resonated with the image of the cold scar in the sky. She had no reason to trust this haunted-looking stranger. His focused presence was an anchor in the storm that her life had become. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Our jailers," Kalen said, the Thane's cold certainty bleeding into his tone. "And they're about to tear this prison apart to find us." As they spoke, Lyra watched from her silent throne in orbit. Her crystalline form glowed with the soft light of intense concentration. The archivist, Kalen, was more magnificent than she had imagined. The integration of the Harbinger memory was volatile but stabilizing. He was a living Rosetta Stone. The paramedic, Alara, was a different but equally fascinating development, a pure sensitive. Her latent abilities unlocked not by memory, but by the raw energy of the breach. They were the first two notes of a symphony she had to conduct. The High Council's culling fleet was already en route, a blunt instrument of galactic extermination. The local wardens were closing in and a pack of hounds following a scent. Lyra needed to intervene, to guide her specimens away from the clumsy hands of the butchers. She couldn't reveal herself, not yet. Direct contact would contaminate the data and alert the council to her treason. She needed a subtler touch. She focused a fraction of her consciousness, weaving a delicate thread of pure logic and information, and pushed it through the veil. It was not a voice, not a thought, but an injection of pure data, aimed directly at the nascent psychic pathways in Kalen's mind. Kalen recoiled as if struck. It wasn't a voice in his head, but a sudden, intrusive understanding. A map of the city's old subway tunnels appeared in his mind's eye, overlaid with the patrol routes of the Warden ground teams. A schematic of their communication network, highlighting its vulnerabilities. And a single, chillingly clear concept: they see you. I see them. Move now. Below ground. I am not your enemy. I am your only hope for an answer. The message was cold, alien, and utterly devoid of emotion, but it rang with the clear, hard truth of a diamond. "What is it?" Ilara asked, seeing the sudden sharp focus in his eyes. "We have a guardian angel," Kalen grunted, grabbing her arm. "Or a new kind of devil. Either way, it wants us to live. We're going underground." He pulled her into the dark, gaping maw of a derelict subway entrance, just as the first Warden patrol vehicles sealed off the end of the street. The air below was thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. It was a descent into a mechanical underworld, a skeleton of a forgotten age. Using the alien map in his head, Kalen navigated the labyrinthine tunnels. Alara, her senses now a tool rather than a curse in the relative quiet of the underground, became his eyes. "They're above us," she'd whisper, her own aura flickering with fear. "3 of them. Their minds feel cold, empty." The wardens were psychically dampened, almost blank slates, making them effective jailers but also easy for Ilara to spot against the background noise. They were being herded. The Warden patrols were too coordinated, too precise. They were being driven toward a specific point. The Thane recognized the strategy instantly, a classic pincer movement, using the tunnel system as a kill box. "It's a trap," Kalen breathed, pulling them into a maintenance conduit. The map. It led us into a trap. Was the alien intelligence malicious? Or just tactically inept? Or was this part of a larger test? The sound of heavy magnetic boots echoed from both ends of the main tunnel. They were caught. There. Ilara pointed toward a rusted grate in the ceiling of the conduit. "I feel air and a lot of noise. It's a nexus." They scrambled up, Kalen's newfound strength allowing him to wrench the rusted metal free. They emerged into the din of a central transit hub, one of the few still functioning arteries of the old system. Crowds of bewildered citizens were being marshaled by transport police, the entire station on lockdown, and standing on the platforms, spaced with geometric precision, were wardens, their gray forms a stark contrast to the panicked civilians. The trap wasn't the tunnel, it was the entire station. They were fish in a barrel. A high, piercing tone suddenly echoed through the station, a frequency designed to disorient and incapacitate. Civilians cried out, clutching their heads. Kalen and Ilara felt it too, but for them, it was worse. It was a direct assault on their awakened senses, a psychic scouring pad designed to shred their minds. Ilara screamed, collapsing as the world of auras dissolved into a blinding white static. Kalen roared, a sound of pure defiance that was more Thane than Archivist. He looked at the nearest warden, who was leveling a rifle, and he didn't just push. He pulled. He seized upon the latent kinetic energy of a speeding train on an adjacent track, a multi-ton behemoth of steel and momentum. He didn't lift it or throw it. He just nudged its path, yanking it sideways off the rails with an impossible, titanic wrench of pure will. The screech of tortured metal was apocalyptic. The train car slammed into the platform where the warden stood, a wave of destruction that ripped through concrete and steel, taking the soldiers and the source of the sonic assault with it. The chaos was absolute. In the momentary pandemonium, Kalen scooped up the semi-conscious Ilara and disappeared into the fleeing crowds. They had survived. They were free. For now. But Kalen understood the terrifying truth. His act of desperation hadn't just saved them. It had been an announcement. He had torn another, bigger hole in the veil. He had shown his hand not just to the wardens on the ground and the mysterious intelligence in the sky, but to the entire silent, watching galaxy. The sleeping god was no longer just stirring. He had opened his eyes and thrown the first punch. Now, the real war would begin. The city became an impossible place to hide. Kalen's spectacular act of defiance in the transit hub had elevated him from a mere anomaly to an existential threat. The wardens, now operating under a direct mandate from the Salenti High Council of Wakatown Phoenix with a ruthless efficiency that choked the life out of the metropolis. Drones swarmed the skies like metallic hornets, their optical and psychic sensors scanning every face, every heat signature, every flicker of auric energy. Checkpoints materialized on every corner, manned by wardens whose blank-faced helmets betrayed no emotion, their rifles held at a low, ready position. The culling was no longer a distant threat. It was a palpable presence, a tightening noose. Kalen and Ilara became ghosts, flitting through the city's forgotten spaces, condemned buildings, sewer lines, the skeletal remains of pre-preserved freeway overpasses. Ilara was their guide. Her sensitivity, once a torment, was now their most vital asset, and she could feel the wardens' cold, empty minds from blocks away. Sensing the patterns of their patrols, the dead zones in their surveillance grid, "They're sweeping Sector 4, she'd murmur, her eyes closed, huddled in the darkness of a forgotten cold storage unit. They move like spiders, all connected. Kalen, in turn, was their weapon. The Thane's mind, a repository of forgotten martial knowledge, taught him how to move, how to fight, how to kill with a brutal economy of motion. He learned to control the echo, to wield his nascent psychic abilities not as a sledgehammer but as a scalpel. He could cloud a drone sensor for a precious few seconds, subtly nudge a warden's attention away from their hiding place, or reinforce his own body to leap impossible distances between rooftops under the cloak of night. They were a symbiotic entity of survival. She was the radar. He was the blade. During the quiet, terrifying moments between flights, the two sides of Kalen's soul were at war. The archivist mourned the life he had lost, the quiet sanctity of his library, the simple pleasure of a well-preserved book. He was horrified by the violence he was now capable of, by the cold, tactical detachment with which the Thane assessed every situation. The Thane, in contrast was a being of pure, unadulterated purpose. He viewed the archivist's fear and guilt as dangerous weaknesses, sentimental baggage from a life that was nothing more than a long, drugged sleep. They built this cage for us. The Lord Admiral's voice would echo in his mind as they watched a warden patrol drag a suspected psychic from their home. Every moment of peace you remember was a lie. They are not preserving order. They are cultivating livestock. There is no negotiating with the farmer. There is only burning the farm. This internal conflict manifested as a quiet, simmering intensity that both frightened and fascinated Alara. She saw the gentle, scholarly man he had been wrestling with the ancient, terrifying king he was becoming. Their mysterious benefactor in the sky remained silent, but its presence was a constant, subtle pressure. Kalen would find caches of supplies, high-energy nutrient paste, water purification tablets, medical supplies left in improbable, hidden locations along their escape routes, their placement too perfect to be a coincidence. Once, cornered in a derelict factory, a security door inexplicably unlocked just as a warden team was about to breach their position, allowing them to slip away into the maintenance tunnels below. It was a ghost in the machine, a silent partner in their rebellion. Kalen came to understand its methods. It never acted directly, never revealed its nature. It only ever nudged probability, opened a door, provided a tool. It was a teacher, forcing them to learn, to adapt, to grow stronger on their own. It was not saving them. It was forging them. They couldn't stay in Phoenix forever. The net was closing. The dead zone's shrinking. They needed to get the word out. They needed to find others like themselves, the ones who had awoken during the breach. But the Preserve's communication networks were a closed loop, monitored and scrubbed by Silenti algorithms. Any broadcast would be traced in seconds. "We can't send a message," Kalen said one night, as they looked out over the glittering, imprisoned city from the shell of a half-built skyscraper. "We have to be the message." The Thane had a plan, one born from 1,000 campaigns of asymmetric warfare, a decapitation strike, not against the wardens, who were merely puppets, but against the Veil itself. The alien intelligence had given him glimpses, schematics of the psychic dampening network. It was a web, and at its heart, in the center of the city, was a primary emitter, the anchor point for the entire regional Veil. Destroying it wouldn't shatter the cage, but it would punch a hole in it so large, so loud, that every latent psychic on the continent would feel it. It would be a psychic scream for freedom. It was also, the archivist noted with a cold knot of dread in his stomach, a suicide mission. The emitter was housed in the Warden Central Command Tower, a brutalist monolith of black steel and fortified plascrete that loomed over the city center. It was the most heavily guarded structure in the preserve. Getting inside was impossible. We don't go inside. The Thane's logic cut through Kalen's fear. We go under. The schematics provided by their guardian angel showed the tower was powered by a geothermal tap, a massive conduit that plunged miles into the Earth's crust. It was their way in. The journey through the city's underbelly was a descent into hell. They navigated geothermal maintenance tunnels, the air thick with the smell of sulfur and superheated steam. The pipes vibrated with immense power, and the heat was a constant, oppressive presence. Alara's senses were blunted by the sheer energy of the place, forcing them to rely on the Thane's tactical acumen and the archivist's memory of the city's old engineering plans. They bypassed pressure sensors, thermal monitors, and the occasional robotic maintenance drone, their progress slow and agonizingly tense. Finally, they reached the base of the primary power conduit, a shaft hundreds of feet wide that rose like the throat of a volcano into the heart of the tower above. The air here crackled with raw energy, and the light from the humming emitter high above cast long, distorted shadows. The regulator rings. Kalen pointed, his voice barely a whisper over the thrum of the machinery. They control the energy flow. If we overload them, the resulting feedback loop should shatter the emitter's focusing crystal. As they began to work, placing salvaged mining charges, another gift from their silent benefactor, on the critical junctures, Alara suddenly stiffened. "They know," she gasped, her face pale. "They're here. Not wardens, something else, something old." From the shadows at the base of the conduit, a figure emerged. It was not a warden. It was a Celenti, Lyra, who had finally descended from her orbital perch. Her crystalline form seemed to absorb the ambient light, her slender limbs moving with an unnerving, fluid grace. She was beautiful and terrifying, a being of living geometry and ancient thought. "You have exceeded all my projections, Kalen Thane." Her voice was not a sound, but a direct telepathic transmission, a calm, cool melody in their minds. It was the same mental signature as their guardian angel. "I am the curator. I have been aiding you." Kalen froze, his hand on the last charge. "You led us here," he stated, the Thane's suspicion overriding the archivist's awe. "Into another trap." "Not a trap," the curator corrected, its tone patient, like a teacher explaining a complex equation. "A crucible. The culling fleet is hours away. They will not just reinforce the veil, they will sterilize this world of all higher life to ensure the echo is silenced forever. This tower is your only hope, and mine." "Yours?" Alara asked, her fear warring with a desperate need to understand. "My purpose is to study you. The Council's is to destroy you. Our objectives are no longer aligned," the curator explained calmly. "Destroying this emitter will not free you, will merely be a shout in the dark. It will give me the distraction I need, while the Council's attention is focused here in this act of defiance. I can divert a transport, a single date, untraceable vessel, and get you off-world." Leave Earth. The archivist in Kalen was horrified. This was his home, his world. But the Thane saw the cold, brutal logic. This was not a war they could win. Not yet. They were two soldiers against an empire. They needed an army. They needed to find the scattered, forgotten remnants of the Harbinger race. "And what happens to everyone here?" Kalen demanded. "The council will proceed with the culling," the curator stated, its voice devoid of pity. It was a simple statement of fact. Billions will die, but the human race, its true potential, will survive. In you, it is a strategically acceptable loss. The coldness of the statement was a physical blow. Kalen looked at Alara, saw the horror in her eyes, and felt the archivist's humanity surge within him. To sacrifice his entire species for his own survival was a monster's choice, but the Thane's voice was a cold whisper in his soul. Empires are not built on sentiment. They are built on sacrifice. Save the seed, and the forest can be regrown. Let the seed die, and there is only desert. Before Kalen could decide, the choice was taken from him. Alarms blared. Crimson lights bathed the chamber in a hellish glow. A squadron of wardens, led by a different type of Silentia hunter, its crystalline form sharper, more angular, and glowing with a predatory red light, repelled down the conduit from above. "The council grows impatient, curator." The hunter's mental voice was a discordant shriek compared to Lyra's melody. "Your experiment is over. Surrender the specimens. That is no longer an option." Lyra replied, her form shifting, hardening. The air around her grew cold as crystalline shards, sharp as razors, materialized around her like a halo of deadly snowflakes. "Go," she commanded Kalen and Alara. "Finish your work. I will buy you time." The chamber erupted into a storm of light and force. Lyra moved like a dancer in a hurricane, her crystal shards intercepting plasma bolts, her own telekinetic power clashing with the hunters. The wardens advanced, and Kalen knew his moment of choice was over. It had been made for him. With a roar of rage and despair, he slammed the final charge into place and hit the detonator. A blinding white light filled the chamber, followed by a rising, keening scream as the regulator rings overloaded. The geothermal tap, freed from its constraints, erupted in a pillar of pure, unrestrained energy. The last thing Kalen saw before the shockwave hit was Lyra, the curator, turning to face the blast, her crystalline form a silhouette against the fire, a silent, defiant guardian at the gates of humanity's future. The world dissolved into a silent, screaming crescendo of white. Kalen felt himself lifted and thrown by a wave of pure force, a god's hand shove that seemed to tear at the very atoms of his being. He had a fleeting, disjointed impression of Alara's terrified cry, of the curator's form shattering into a billion motes of light like a broken diamond, and of the hunter's red rage being utterly consumed. Then, blackness. He awoke to a gentle, rhythmic hum and the feeling of soft, yielding material beneath him. The air was cool, sterile, and tasted faintly of ozone and recycled oxygen. He sat up, his body aching with a profound, bone-deep weariness. But he was whole. He was in a small, minimalist cabin, the walls a smooth, seamless gray that seemed to absorb the soft, indirect light. A circular viewport showed not the familiar blue of Earth's sky, but an impossible, breathtaking vista, the star-dusted velvet of deep space. And hanging in the void like a bruised pearl was the planet he had just fled. A vast, shimmering wound, an aurora of raw psychic energy, pulsed over the North American continent. A visible scar where the Phoenix emitter had been. It was the aftermath of his psychic scream, a beacon for anyone who could see. Alara was slumped in a chair opposite him, her eyes wide as she stared at the receding earth. She looked pale, traumatized, but physically unharmed. "The curator," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It saved us. It wrapped us in some kind of shield just before the blast. Kalen moved to the viewport, his hand resting on the cool, transparent material. He could feel the Thane's cold satisfaction at the successful operation mingling with the Archivist's crushing, overwhelming grief. He had done it. He had freed himself. But he had damned his world. He could almost hear the screams of the billions below who would pay the price for his escape. Strategically acceptable loss. He murmured, the curator's final, chilling words echoing in his mind. The phrase tasted like ash. He was no longer just Kalen the Archivist or Kalen Thane the Conqueror. He was something new, something forged in that fire, a survivor burdened with an impossible debt. The ship they were on was a marvel of alien engineering, clearly one of the curator's assets. It was small, sleek, and utterly silent. There was no crew, no visible controls. It seemed to navigate with a purpose of its own, a ghost ship carrying the last two embers of a dying fire into the vast, cosmic dark. For days they drifted in silence, the ship's automated systems providing for their needs. Alara slept fitfully, plagued by nightmares, her mind struggling to process the sheer, mind-breaking scale of their reality. Kalen, however, found little rest. He spent his time at the viewport, the Thane's consciousness processing the star charts that flickered into existence on the viewport surface, a final gift from Lyra. He was cross-referencing them with the fragmented memories of the Harbinger Empire, seeking a destination, a sanctuary, a place to begin again. He found one, a name that resonated deep within the Lord Admiral's memory, a place of immense significance, Xylos. According to the Thane's fragmented recollection, Xylos was not a planet but a rogue celestial body, a shard of a long-dead star system that had been hollowed out and converted into a secret military archive and listening post during the Harbinger's reign. A ghost world, I say, cloaked from all conventional sensors, forgotten by the galaxy. It was a perfect place to hide, to plan, to understand what they had become. He somehow knew how to interface with the ship, his mind touching the vessel's strange, semi-sentient core systems, and nudged their course towards the forgotten coordinates. Their journey was a lonely, silent vigil. They were truly, utterly alone. The last inheritors of a legacy they were only just beginning to comprehend. One cycle, as Kalen meditated, trying to sift through the chaotic library of the Thane's memories. Alara approached him. The terror in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, hardened resolve. "I can still feel it," she said, her voice steady. "Earth. It's quieter now. The noise is gone. The screaming has stopped." She looked at the psychic wound on the planet, now a fading, ghostly bruise. The culling. Kalen nodded. The archivist's guilt, a physical weight in his chest. "It's my fault." "No," Alara said, her gaze firm. "It's their fault. They built the prison. They swung the axe. You just refused to kneel. There's a difference." Her strength surprised him, and in that moment, he realized she had been forged in the crucible just as he had. She was no longer just a sensitive. She was a seer, her empathy a source of impossible resilience. "The Thane in your head," she continued. "He sees people as assets, as soldiers. But the man, the archivist, he knows why we're fighting, not just for an empire, for the right to choose, to feel, to be something more than a data set." She reached out, her hand hovering just over his. "We need both of you to survive this." Their arrival at Xylos was anticlimactic. The ship slipped through the cloaking field without a ripple, revealing a jagged, planet-sized shard of crystalline rock adrift in the interstellar void. Its surface was a chaotic mess of unnatural angles and razor-sharp edges. But as they drew closer, A section of the rock face dissolved into a shimmering portal, revealing the hollow interior. The ship landed in a vast, silent hangar filled with the skeletal remains of ancient Harbinger warships, behemoths of black, organic-looking metal that slumbered under a thick blanket of cosmic dust. The air was cold, thin, and carried the scent of deep time. As the ship's ramp lowered, Kaelin and Ilara stepped out into the heart of their inheritance. The scale of the place was staggering. It was a city-sized tomb, a monument to a forgotten age of gods. Dim, atmospheric lights flickered to life as they moved, sensing their presence. They had been expected. They were not alone. As they ventured deeper into the archive, following pathways that lit up before them, they came to a vast central chamber. At its heart was a throne, carved from the same black, light-devouring material as the shard Kaelin had found in the desert. And on the throne sat a figure. It was humanoid, but impossibly ancient. Its body was frail, almost skeletal, kept alive by a network of glowing life-sustaining conduits that snaked from the throne into its flesh. Its eyes were closed, but as Kaelin and Ilara entered, they snapped open, revealing twin pools of molten gold, burning with an intelligence that was terrifyingly vast. So, a voice echoed, not in their minds, but in the air itself, a dry, rustling sound like ancient paper. A Thane of the Third Fleet and a newborn seer. The curator's final, desperate gambit. She always was a sentimentalist. Kaelin instinctively stepped in front of Ilara, the Thane's consciousness flaring to life, assessing the threat. The being on the throne was a harbinger, an ancient one. His psychic presence a colossal, overwhelming weight. "Who are you?" Kaelin demanded, his voice betraying none of the archivist's terror. The ancient being gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "I am the archivist, the last of the first. I am the memory of our people, bound to this place when the Silenti cast their great lie upon us. I have watched the cage for 10,000 years. I have watched our children dream." The ancient archivist, whose name was Silas, explained his existence. He had survived the end of the war by severing his own connection to the psychic chorus of his people, a self-imposed exile that had preserved his mind when the veil fell and shattered the rest. He had become a living library, his mind the sole repository of uncorrupted Harbinger history, technology, and culture. He was the truth. "The curator believed you were the key to our survival," Silas rasped, his golden eyes boring into Kaelin. "She was wrong. You are the key to our vengeance." Silas showed them the truth of their past, not through words, but by opening a fraction of his own mind to them. They saw the Harbinger Empire in its full, terrible glory, not as benevolent rulers, but as a species that saw the universe as a canvas for their will, reshaping galaxies, extinguishing inconvenient stars, and enslaving lesser races with a casual, godlike indifference. They saw the war with the Silenti, a conflict not of good versus evil, but of one cosmic absolute against another. The Silenti, Silas explained, were not jailers out of malice. They were order against the Harbinger's chaos. They had imprisoned humanity not to punish them, but to quarantine them, to save the rest of the universe from their terrifying, reality-bending power. "They did not defeat us," Silas hissed, a flicker of ancient fury in his voice. "They drugged us. They turned us into cattle and told us it was paradise." Silas's proposal was simple and horrifying. Xylos was not just an archive, it was an arsenal. The slumbering warships in the hangar were only the beginning. Deeper within the asteroid were Genesis forges, cloning vats, and psycho-indoctrination chambers, the tools to build an army. He needed Kalen's military genius, the Thane's mind, to lead this new army. He needed Alara's nascent seer abilities to navigate the psychic currents of the galaxy, to find the other scattered, lost tribes of humanity worlds like Earth that had been seeded and imprisoned after the Great War. "We will awaken them," Silas declared, his voice rising with a fanatical zeal. "We will shatter their cages and remind them of the fire within. We will rebuild our empire on the ashes of the Silenti and their pathetic galactic order." Kalen was horrified. The archivist in him saw it as trading one form of tyranny for another. They would become the monsters the Silenti claimed they were. But the Thanes saw the path to power, to reclaiming their birthright. He saw the cold, hard necessity of it all. He looked at Alara, expecting to see revulsion, but instead, he saw a profound, sorrowful clarity. "He's right," she said quietly, her voice heavy. "Not about the Empire, not about the vengeance, but about the awakening. Our people on Earth, they died as slaves, dreaming they were free. Whatever else we do, we can't let that happen to anyone else. We have to give them the choice. The choice." It was the one thing the Silenti had taken from them, and it was the one thing they had to get back. Kalen looked at the ancient, fanatical king on the throne, at the powerful, empathetic woman by his side, and at the ghost of his own conquered world. The path forward was no longer about survival. It was about defining what it meant to be human. Would they be the gentle dreamers the Silenti had tried to create? Or the ruthless gods they had once been? Or could they, somehow, become something entirely new? The decision was made. They would use the archivist's tool, but not for his purpose. They would not build an empire of vengeance. They would start a revolution of truth. Their first target, another prison, another sleeping world. They would become the ones who shattered the dream. The Genesis forges of Xylos roared back to life with a sound like a star being born. Under Silas's gleeful direction and the Thane's cold, tactical guidance, the ancient archive transformed into a war factory. Kalen found himself a reluctant prodigy of destruction. The Lord Admiral's memories provided the blueprints for ships that were less machines and more living weapons, their hulls grown from black, psycho-reactive metal that could repair itself and respond to a captain's thoughts. He oversaw the decanting of the Echo-born, the first generation of a new Harbinger army, cloned soldiers infused with a baseline of psychic ability and the ingrained tactical knowledge of his old fleet. They were born with golden eyes and a chilling, unquestioning loyalty. The archivist in Kalen was sickened by it all. He was creating a slave army to fight a war for freedom, a monstrous irony that gnawed at his soul. He saw the Echo-born not as soldiers, but as children born into a war they hadn't chosen, their minds pre-formatted for violence. Yet the Thane was relentless, arguing the cold, hard logic. To defeat a god, you must become a devil. This is the price of our future. Alara, however, found a different purpose. She refused to participate in the creation of soldiers, instead immersing herself in the deep archives, in the cultural and philosophical records of their ancestors. While Kalen built an army, she sought to understand its soul. She discovered that the Harbingers had not always been conquerors. In their most ancient history, they had been explorers by days, creators, artists whose psychic abilities were used to shape worlds into paradises, not fortresses. The descent into cosmic tyranny had been a gradual one, born of fear and a schism in their society that Silas conveniently failed to mention. She also learned to master her seer abilities, reaching out with her mind across the vastness of space. She could feel the other prisons, the other Earths, scattered across the galaxy, dozens of them, each wrapped in its own veil, each filled with the dreaming, slumbering descendants of the Harbinger race. She felt their quiet hopes, their mundane fears, their untapped, godlike potential. She became their silent, distant witness, and their plight solidified her resolve. She would not allow Kaelin to become the monster Silas wanted, even if it meant standing against the Thane himself. The first test of their new order came when Alara located the nearest prison world, a planet designated by the Silenti as Tyrannus. Its people lived in a pre-industrial agrarian society, a pastoral dream designed to keep their psychic potential utterly dormant. The Silenti High Council, rattled by the events on Earth, had reinforced the veil around Tyrannus and dispatched a fleet to monitor it. A fleet commanded by the very same hunter who had faced Lyra in the Phoenix Tower, now reconstituted and burning with a cold, vengeful fury. Silas clamored for a direct, overwhelming assault, smash their fleet, shatter their veil, and awaken the populace with the fire of righteous war he rasped from his throne. But Alara refused. "We can't," she argued, standing before Kaelin in the holographic strategy room, the image of Tyrannus hanging between them. "Their minds aren't ready. A violent awakening like yours would shatter them. We can't free them by turning them into broken weapons. We have to give them the choice. Lyra never could." The Archivist and the Thane fought a silent, violent war inside Kaelin's mind. The Thane saw the logic in Silas's plan. A swift, brutal attack was the most efficient path to victory. But the Archivist heard Alara, heard the echo of Lyra's sacrifice, and saw a different path. He was tired of strategically acceptable losses. He overruled Silas. They would go to Tyrannus not as conquerors, but as thieves. Their plan was audacious. A single, small Harbinger vessel, the Whisper, would slip past the Silenti fleet, its hull capable of bending light and psychic signatures. Kaelin and Alara would go alone, their mission to infiltrate the planet's primary veil emitter, not to destroy it, but to hijack it. Alara believed she could subtly alter the veil's frequency, not shattering it, but weakening it, send the psychic dampening field into a gentle, subconscious broadcast. She would plant a seed, a dream of stars, a whisper of their true history, the concept of a choice into the collective unconscious of the Tyrannian people. It was a war for their hearts and minds, not their bodies. The infiltration was a nerve-shredding affair. They slipped through the Silenti blockade like a ghost, the Thane's piloting skills and Alara's precognitive warnings allowing them to dodge patrol routes and sensor sweeps by mere inches. They landed in the planet's uninhabited polar regions and journeyed for weeks to the emitter, a crystalline spire that hummed with a quiet, oppressive power. As they reached the spire, the hunter's mental voice slammed into them, a shriek of pure hatred that echoed across the planet. "I feel you. Anomaly. You cannot hide from the eye of order." The hunter had sensed their psychic footprint. The Silenti fleet began to converge on their position. Inside the spire, as Kaelin fought off automated defense systems with a grace and fury he now fully accepted, Alara pressed her hands against the central focusing crystal. She closed her eyes and became a conduit. She didn't fight the veil, she joined with it, her mind weaving through its complex psychic matrix. On, she found the dreams of the Tyranian people and began to sing a new song into their sleep. She showed them images of starships, of distant galaxies, of hands that could shape light. She didn't give them answers, she gave them questions. What if the sky is not the limit? What if you are more than you believe on the surface? Farmers looked up from their fields, their minds momentarily filled with a strange, beautiful longing. Children drew pictures of impossible, silver ships in the dirt. A seed of curiosity, of rebellion, was planted. As the first Silenti ground, forces stormed the spire. Kaelin knew their time was up. He grabbed Alara, whose body was limp from the mental exertion, and they fled back to the Whisper, lifting off just as plasma fire glassed the ice shelf where they had landed. They had succeeded, but the hunter was in pursuit, its flagship a blade of vengeful red light. The chase through the Tyrannus system was a desperate, brilliant duel. The hunter was a master tactician, but Kalen was the Lord Admiral. He led the Silenti ship through asteroid fields, danced on the edge of the gas giant's gravity well, and used every trick the Thane's memory provided. But the Whisper was a scout ship, not a warship. It was only a matter of time, as the hunter cornered them against the system's sun, its weapons powering up for the final kill. Something impossible happened. The Silenti ship shuddered, its energy signature flickering wildly. On its bridge, the hunter shrieked in confusion as its crew, its psychically dampened Silenti subordinates, suddenly turned on each other, their minds collapsing into chaos. Aboard the Whisper, Kalen and Alara watched in stunned silence. The comm channel crackled to life, and a familiar, melodic mental voice filled their minds. I told you my objectives were no longer aligned with the Council's. It appears my contingency plans were successful. It was Lyra. Her consciousness, not destroyed but scattered by the emitter's blast, had survived as pure information, a ghost in the Silenti's own psychic network. She had spent months reassembling herself, and now, at the critical moment, she had infiltrated the hunter's ship and torn its crew's minds apart from the inside. Lyra's return changed everything. She was now a digital, psychic entity, free from physical form, capable of moving through networks, infiltrating systems, and turning the Silenti's greatest weapon, their interconnectedness, against them. She became their spy master, their saboteur, their goddess in the machine. Back on Xylos, a schism formed. Silas saw Lyra's intervention and Alara's success as a dangerous new precedent, a move away from the glorious, open warfare he craved. He saw their gentle awakening as a pathetic weakness. The final confrontation happened in the throne room. Silas, his golden eyes blazing with fanatical light, condemned Kalen. You have been corrupted by a Silenti ghost and a sentimental girl. You have forsaken your destiny. The Echoborn answer to me now. We will wage this war as it was meant to be waged, with fire and blood. But as the Echoborn soldiers leveled their rifles, their faces blank and obedient, Alara stepped forward. She didn't speak to Silas or Kalen. She spoke to them. She reached out with her mind, not with a command, but with an offer. She showed them her own memories, the fear of the alleyway in Phoenix, the beauty of the Tyrannian dream, the sorrow of a lost Earth. She showed them they were more than weapons. They were people. One by one, the Echoborn lowered their rifles. Their golden eyes, for the first time, flickered with something new: confusion, doubt, choice. Kalen faced the sputtering, enraged Silas. For the first time, the Archivist and the Thane spoke with a single, unified voice. A quiet, resolute calm. Your war is over, Archivist. Your empire is a memory. We are not restoring the past. We are building a future. He didn't kill the ancient Harbinger. He simply had the Echoborn disconnect him from the throne's life support, leaving the frail, ancient being to finally fade into the history he so desperately clung to. In the years that followed, a new galactic order was born, led by Kalen, the reluctant general, Alara, the compassionate seer, and Lyra, the omnipresent mind. They did not conquer. They liberated. They moved from one prison world to the next, not with fleets of warships, but with whispers, with dreams, with the gift of a question. They shattered the veils, but they did so gently, allowing each culture to awaken at its own pace, to choose its own destiny. They became the midwives of a galactic renaissance. Humanity was awake again, not as a monolithic, conquering empire, but as a diverse tapestry of worlds and peoples, each one free to reach for the stars in their own way. The Silenti Empire, crippled by Lyra's internal sabotage and unable to comprehend a war fought for hearts and minds, crumbled into isolation and irrelevance. The Great Veil was replaced by a great conversation. Kalen never returned to Earth, but he often looked towards its distant star in the ship's viewport. He was no longer a prisoner, no longer just a Thane or an archivist. He was a liberator, a title far heavier than any crown. He knew the darkness was still out there, that the universe would always hold new threats. But for the first time in 10,000 years, humanity was free. They would face the future not as sleeping gods, but as a species finally, truly awake.